We are losing 1,000 London taxi drivers every year. If this trend continues at this rate, there will be no more London taxi drivers by 2040. In the best case scenario, we need a massive influx of people to come on the knowledge just to keep our numbers stable. So what's causing this decline and what can be done about it? Well, I'm going to explore all of that in this video.
This game's finished. Always has been.
You're better off on the dole.
Before I get into my points, I've got to explain why this is a big issue. You might be thinking, well, Tom, you are a London taxi driver. Surely if there's less taxi drivers out there, then you will have less competition. That means you're more profitable, you can earn more money, and your job's going to be much better. Short term, yes, I will be busier, and it is quite a nice feeling to always have one passenger in and out. But long term, not very good for the passenger. Think about it, if you're at Liverpool Street Station or somewhere late at night, it's raining and you're waiting 10 minutes for a taxi, 20 minutes for a taxi, and you have no idea as to when or where that taxi is going to appear from, you might be willing to search for alternatives, even if you wouldn't normally use the other mob. That is the ultimate problem. We need a reliable service, and we already see this in the height of the summer. Wimbledon tennis, or maybe if there's a big gig going on at the O2, lots of people have to go without getting a taxi or wait a very long time because there's not enough taxis to cover the demand. Taxi numbers have kind of always floated around the 25,000 mark, and that includes all London drivers, which is green badge like myself. We mainly concentrate on the centre, but we can pick up and do work wherever. And suburban drivers, yellow badge drivers who work in a specific sector, usually on an outer borough of London. You'll see from 2009-10, the numbers just under 25,000, and that remained the case till about 2015-2016. Compared with now, the total drivers as of mid-June 2024 is 17,250. So from 2013-14, 10 years ago, to now, 2023-2024, we've had a reduction of around 8,000 taxi drivers. That's almost a third of our workforce has gone missing in 10 years. So what could be causing such downturns in the number of London taxi drivers? Well, many of you are probably shouting and screaming at the screen right now and saying, Uber. But I don't think it's quite that simple, because in 2009-10 we had almost 25,000 drivers, and Uber came to London in 2012, and by that time our numbers had increased. Okay, there might have been a bit of a lag because 2012 Uber comes to town. Let's say you started the knowledge in 2012. Well, it takes a few years to get through the knowledge, so maybe it takes a few more years for those numbers to be expressed. Even by 2016-2017, 5 years after Uber had come to town, we were only down by 500 drivers expressed in 2009-2010. But we can look at private hire data, and obviously Ubers will fall into private hire category. 2009-10, almost 60,000 private hire drivers. By 2016-2017, that number had almost doubled. So Uber was clearly having an effect in London at this time, but that wasn't being represented in taxi driver numbers. Also, if it was down to Uber, I think us taxi drivers would experience a massive decline in work, even if we have got less drivers. So whilst Uber may have a bit of an impact on the number of taxi drivers in London, I don't believe this to be the sole reason. Now, whilst I've discussed the worrying topic of losing taxi drivers, one area that you don't have to worry about is losing your hair. And that is through today's sponsor, which is Manual. Now, Manual is men's healthcare made easily. Their range of scientifically proven treatments not only stop hair loss, but actually power regrowth, whether that's receding hairline, bald spot, or thinning hair. You can take their free assessment online and you'll get a tailored treatment plan specifically for you. Now, since using Manual's all-in-one treatment, I have noticed a real lushness to my hair, and the treatments are 94% effective. But you haven't got to take my word for that. Just check out the Trustpilot reviews. Manual are that confident that you'll find the right treatment to support your hair growth that they have a money-back guarantee. And it gets even better because Manual are giving you a full 55% off your first tailored treatment plan. Just use my code TOMH55 or the link in the description down below. It's convenient, next day delivery, and awesome ongoing support from their clinicians. From regrowing hair to regrowing the numbers of London taxi drivers.
Is this the room 12 for starting the knowledge?
You are?
Now, I can't actually find the exact numbers of those on the knowledge. There is somewhere that TfL put online about where students are in the knowledge process. So how many are already going through it, how many are newly applied, etc. But we know that the numbers are basically going down. A couple of reasons for this. First off was a huge blunder on TfL's part that they weren't accepting new applications onto the knowledge during the pandemic.
You must stay at home.
I was actually contacted by many people who were interested in beginning the knowledge, especially in a time like the pandemic, because historically, times of recession and things like that prompts people to think about their career options, maybe move into a new career, have more agency in their life, and take up such a challenge as the knowledge. TfL weren't actually taking on new applications. I think because of a lot of departments working from home, many people were just emailing and just getting nothing back. They wanted to do this. I've just found an article here that the applications in the year of 2012 was 3,000 students. And in 2021, it was just 174. The numbers are rising again now. This cites the fact that in 2024, the total hit 579. So that's triple the figure from 2021. We'll probably get a bit of an influx as well because we've had companies such as FreeNow, Get, Addison Lee, private hire firms who are giving subsidies and grants to their drivers to be able to go ahead and do the knowledge.
What's the knowledge then?
So the knowledge is, of course, the in-depth study that every cabbie has to do to earn their badge. And it takes around 2 to 4 years to complete this. The newspapers, pundits, etc. will exert the idea that it's too difficult, it's too archaic, and it needs to be scrapped and removed. And so much so that City Hall, the Mayor of London, TfL have all actively questioned the idea of, do we just kind of scrap it or do we dumb it down in some way? I speak with most cab drivers in that we would not want the knowledge dumbed down in any way, shape or form. But I personally would rather have no standard than a lower standard. At least if they got rid of it entirely, you knew where you stood with the cab drivers who are out on the street. In terms of it being too hard or archaic, I call bullshit on that because the knowledge has always been difficult. People know that it's an investment of time. It's not hard in terms of the difficulty, like doing the knowledge is not difficult in the actual process. What is difficult about it is the consistency. It is showing up, it is having that cadence and that commitment to the process from start to finish. And bearing in mind your knowledge journey takes over 3 years, it's the reason why it's one of the hardest things you'll ever do, because the cadence is full on, full time, but sustained over multiple years. Over time, the testing system has become much more fairer and transparent. If you go back to the 70s, 80s, 90s, drivers would have no idea where they would be in the system on the knowledge. Were they getting much closer to their badge? You could sort of find out by what stage you was on. You would be on the more quicker stages, i.e. 28 days, 21 days and 14 days back in the day, but you would never know when you would drop down into those stages, right? It was just at the discretion of the examiner, seemingly. Whereas now, it's a standardized system where I, as a student on the knowledge, could see my progress. Okay, if I score on 2 more exams, I'll get my drop, and then potentially it could be 8 more exams until I get my badge. I would argue that since the pandemic, with low traffic neighbourhoods and less availability of roads, the amount that you have to learn or the amount of opportunities of being able to wiggle through little back streets is less. So there's less to think about. You are more stuck on the main roads. Also, there's no redlining system. So the red line was basically a system that could send you back to preceding stages if your standard dropped. And that would add a lot of time on the knowledge. Where we are currently is probably the best incentive to get people to come on the knowledge. Now, what else could be driving the lower driver numbers? Well, I think the vehicle has a big part to play here. From 2017, you could not license a new diesel taxi in London. So even though Mercedes was still making the veto, if you went and bought one and tried to bring it into London, it wasn't allowed. London were getting rid of diesels, and the same went for TX4s as well. Following on from this, age limits of diesel taxis were reduced from 15 years down to 12 years. Basically, when you have a taxi in London, the maximum amount of time you're allowed to use it for is 15 years as a licensed London taxi. Doesn't matter how many miles you've put on it, doesn't matter if it sails through every single MOT, if you've kept it in the most pristine condition, if you've left it in a garage for 15 years, from when it's first registered until it reaches its 15th birthday, its 15th year of service, it is no longer allowed to be used as a licensed London taxi. With the diesels, 3 years was chopped off the lifespan. So imagine this, you're age 62, you've got a London taxi that you paid off 7 years ago and it took you 5 years to pay off, so that taxi is now 12 years old. You're roaming around stress-free in London because you haven't got to pay any rent or any lease payments on your taxi. That's paid off, everything you take is pure profit. Then, a little man at City Hall turns around and says, "Diesels are the devil, you are no longer allowed to have one more than 12 years old in London." Yes, your money-making vehicle is no longer allowed in London. So at the age of 62, with potentially 3 more years before hanging up your badge for retirement, are you really going to commit to a brand new taxi? And the options now aren't diesel, they're electric taxis. Transport for London, at the same time, brought out a delicensing scheme. So depending when you get in on the scheme, you could get between £6,000 and £10,000 for your old diesel taxi, which the mayor has just deemed is completely worthless. So that 62-year-old man who was going to wait a few more years before retirement has effectively got a final lump sum to send him off into the sunset of his retirement. Now, I'm not saying that every single driver was near retirement age or all their circumstances were the same, because I know of drivers who did the delicensing scheme and yes, did go and get a new taxi. But it would have made more sense if that scheme was more promoted towards converting people to electric rather than just getting rid of an older diesel. Oh, and to top it off, this also coincided with COVID-19, so work levels were exceptionally low anyway, so the lucrative payment of a delicensing scheme couldn't have come at a better time. And the frustrating thing was, unless you had a Euro 6 taxi, it didn't matter where in the cycle of ownership on your diesel taxi you was. You could have gone down the dealership a couple of months prior and then the mayor announces that, sorry, 12 years is the oldest that cab can be, not 15. These drivers just had 3 years removed off of their income potential overnight. So these 3 events, diesels being age reduced, the delicensing scheme and COVID-19, were a perfect storm to encourage cab drivers to sell up and take an early retirement. But why not rent a taxi in the short term? Well, taxi fleets also got hit hard in COVID. Pretty much everyone who rented a taxi took it back to the garage and said, "Here you go, I can't make any money, I can't afford to pay this taxi on a weekly basis, you have it." And we saw the images of those taxi-like graveyards where fleet owners had to find creative ways of storing all these taxis that were normally let out to drivers. The issue is that you've got a lot of stock sat there not earning you any money. So, to free up a bit of cash flow, many of the fleets downsized. They got rid of their taxis. Added in the fact that there was the delicensing scheme, meaning that they were incentivised for doing so. The problem, of course, was that when work levels returned in late 2020 and summer of 2021, there wasn't enough cabs to go around. Drivers who had hung up their badge, gone and worked as Tesco delivery drivers, couldn't go back to their old garage and get their cab back as easily as they once had. In fact, there was outcry. There was so many drivers who desperately needed to get hold of a taxi, but the fleet owners couldn't provide it.
4,000 or 5,000 potential drivers looking for cabs. They will have to seek employment elsewhere. And like I said before, when they phone up, I said, don't hand your notice in yet. I can't bring you back into our game.
Added to the fact that fleet owners couldn't go out and buy new taxis because there was financial restraints on lending during that weird pandemic time. So many of them wanted to reinvest and buy newer vehicles, but they weren't able to get the finance to do so. Work levels were at an all-time high and drivers were literally sitting on their hands begging fleets for a taxi. And this still hasn't fully recovered. We still have more taxi drivers than physical vehicles to go around. Yes, I know not every taxi driver is out there physically working right now, but you still need a good stock of cabs. And what this has actually now done is that it's removed some of the part-time workforce that we had. Pre-pandemic, you used to be able to go down to some taxi garages on a weekend and say, hey, can I rent a cab by the day, or I just want the cab for the weekend. More drivers are actually in rental cabs long term. They don't chop and change like they once did. Rental garages also want a bit more of an agreement because these taxis are exceptionally expensive, so they want to be able to ensure that all their finances and costs are covered. It basically means that taxi driving is very much a full-time occupation. It's not something that can be done as easily part-time as it once was. And I imagine as a result, we've lost some of the smaller fleets. Even Asher Moses of Sherbert Taxi Rentals spoke of his concerns in the Mayor of London Assembly related to the knowledge and taxi drivers, just how difficult it is being able to grow and expand his fleet because of the cost of the vehicles.
I can't afford the vehicles today with a 7,500 grant. We won't be buying more vehicles.
What about the younger entrants to the trade, the newer driver, the lifeblood, the long-term drivers that are coming through? People like me that are probably embarking on this career. Where are they? Well, I imagine in the 70s, 80s and 90s, once you left school, unless you kind of got a skill, became, a carpenter, a labourer of some sort, there wasn't really that much out there in terms of work. And added to the fact that if the knowledge was a viable option, there would have been lots of people doing that, and you would have seen people do that. But now, if you're a Gen Z, there is an abundance of opportunities out there, and I don't envy them one bit. You could day trade crypto. You could become a YouTube superstar. You could go to university, long-term travel, geo-arbitrage and work in different places, cushy working from home jobs. There's just too many options available. The glamorous life of being a taxi driver is just a little bit too far down that roster of the more, quote, glamorous jobs that are above it. On the face of it, it doesn't seem like a glamorous job, but what I did was that I reversed engineered what I wanted from life. I didn't really like working in a corporate structure. I couldn't get on with company politics. It felt like I was chained to a desk, and having to turn up Monday to Friday 9 to 5 just seemed awful. Retail was a little bit better, but I didn't really like working weekends, and the trouble with retail is that you get into management and there's not really much else to go from there. So I wanted some kind of autonomy, some control of my life, or being able to have a life and then work would come second. And that's what taxi driving has offered to me. I go on frequent holidays throughout the year. I've done some extended periods of travel. I learned how to snowboard. I started this YouTube channel. It's offered me everything and more that I want from life. But I think people just look at the actual nature of what the job is and just think, that's not cool or sexy enough, and they don't go for it. When I love it, I love getting in my cab, I love driving around town, the fact that the cab is mine, it is my own vehicle, and I get to fully, authentically show up as me, not as someone else, not within a corporate entity. Look, I love the London taxi trade, and if you've made it this far into the video, please hit the subscribe button, because that does wonders in helping me be able to promote the London taxi trade and hopefully save us on many of the issues I've shared within this video. If you want to learn how to become a London taxi driver, well, I made an in-depth guide of all the steps of what to expect throughout the entire process. I'll leave that on screen for you now.